Breaking news today on Sekulow as the U.S. Senate passes the radical left's wish list.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
This weekend, the Senate passed what they're calling the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, all the analysis and reports done on this show that will have no impact on inflation, might even have a bad impact on inflation because, of course, this is more government spending to the tune of doubling the size of the IRS employment-wise. So we'll go through those numbers in just a minute. And we're going to be joined by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to talk about this legislation, too. And I remind you last week when he said, remember, the Chinese look at, too, how are we domestically? Do we have riots? Do we have rampant crime? Do we have rapid inflation? Are the American people feeling down on their luck? Because that impacts, of course, how the decision-making of the Chinese Communist Party. So you don't just divorce the issues of what's going on internationally, and the U.S. is a superpower, from what's going on right here at home. So we're going to walk through this. Now, it hasn't gone through the House of Representatives yet. The group that would most likely be the ones to scuttle any of this would be the far left members, the squad-type members of the House of Representatives, but they've got a lot of their Green New Deal in here. So maybe they're okay with the private equity investors getting a pass on the tax increase because of their Green New Deal. This should be the largest government spending bill ever in the United States when it comes to climate issues. But at the same time, they're saying that Joe Manchin now it's not in there, but he got approval for more drilling in Alaska. But that's, of course, you're not going to see that in legislative text and hasn't gone through any of the federal government's red flags. And a pipeline in West Virginia, which remains unbuilt. So I think, again, they always use those as kind of issues that they kick the can down the road on that never get approved by the federal government. This is, again, a massive increase in the amount of people who will be audited by the IRS. In fact, that's how the Democrats are saying it's an interesting year to run on, to say we're going to pay for this legislation that you're going to love so much by auditing more middle-class Americans who can't rely on big law firms and accounting firms to do their taxes and shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be a process that's that difficult for them. Small business owners, again, that fall under this is always that $400,000 a year or more number they throw out is bogus. You start cutting it through that, you start realizing a couple $100,000 a year. It includes small business owners as well as they pay taxes. So we're opposed to this, but we also have to deal with the realities that it looks likely that unless Democrats scuttle it themselves in the House of Representatives, this is going to go to the president's desk, and we're going to have to deal with a supersized IRS.
You're talking about supersized. You're talking about 87,000 more agents. Now you're talking about an agency that's incompetent to begin with. Giving them more money makes them to spend more money to be incompetent. So Americans are getting more of their paycheck taken out in taxes to fund IRS to audit middle-income Americans. I mean, you think about that for a moment. But there's also something else. The Wharton School of Business evaluated the Inflation Reduction Act and said it actually has zero impact on inflation. In fact, inflation may rise under this act. So I think the part of the problem here, and I think we have to be clear on this, is that they put these titles and names to these bills to make it sound palatable. But at the end of the day, it's not only not palatable, it's dangerous what they're proposing because it doesn't have a coherent economic base. And that is the fundamental problem that exists here. Our economic team's looking at it right now. But again, likely to pass in the United States Congress, it looks like at this point.
Yes, I mean, again, it would be Democrats that have to defeat this. There's not enough Republican votes to do that, obviously, in the House right now. So you've got to say, will it be the squad who think this is not enough Green New Deal? But it is. I mean, this is the first, largest spending on during a time when people are calling a recession. Inflation is high, very high. They are spending more on climate than they've ever spent in the history of the federal government. We'll take your calls, your comments at 1-800-684-3110. We come back, we'll be joined by former Secretary of State, our senior counsel for global affairs, Mike Pompeo. And I encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We'll be right back on Sekulow.
The Senate passed a major bill overnight. It'll affect your bottom line, and it comes after a marathon weekend session.
Called the Inflation Reduction Act, it is the largest federal investment to address climate change.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.
According to the CBO and other economic organizations who have studied this bill, it will, in fact, have a minimal impact on inflation.
We've changed the world in a way that you rarely get an opportunity to do that.
Republicans, meanwhile, bashing the bill as bad for the economy.
Joe Biden's pushed us, and these plans are pushing us into a recession.
Why take the risk of throwing us into deeper stagflation?
It adds $80 billion to the IRS budget, adding thousands of agents and thousands of more audits on middle-class Americans.
The Democrats are making the IRS bigger than the Pentagon, plus the Department of State, plus the FBI, plus the Border Patrol combined.
Most Americans realize that if the government spends more money and spends more money recklessly and unnecessarily, then that's going to lead to more inflation.
All taxes, all these government expenses ultimately go back to the consumer and to the taxpayer. And these are people that are trying to put groceries on their table. They're trying to buy back-to-school clothing coming up in the next couple of weeks, and they're having to make tough choices.
All the Democrats say they're worried and want to lower gas prices. They all just voted to raise gas taxes and to raise your price at the pump.
What they're really trying to do is to take dollars and then redistribute it back out to the places that they think it should be done. And in this case, they're looking at things that they want to do, primarily on climate change.
It's full steam ahead to the House. Lawmakers there will make a brief return to D.C. on Friday to take up this legislation. It's expected to pass there, too, and then straight to the president's desk for signature.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We're joined now by our senior counsel for global affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Secretary Pompeo, we have Democrats celebrating passing what they're calling this, quote, Inflation Reduction Act in the Senate over the weekend. It now moves to the House and could ultimately move to President Biden's desk. It would take Democrats scuttling it to stop that. You called it a cover for more government spending. What do you think the impact's going to be? Because they, on the American people, they try to sell these usually as, you're going to get influx, you're going to get a check, you're going to get something where people kind of give it a pass. But in this, trying to find out, what is this? How is this benefiting an everyday average American? It's tough to figure out.
Jordan, it is tough to figure out. And I actually think while they seem pretty celebratory today, they should be very careful about what they celebrate. This will prove to be a victory without any, that'll be very hollow, because it will come back to harm the American people. Average, ordinary families who are trying to live their lives, go to church, do the things we all do, will be punished by this. There are deeply buried in this huge handouts to the union bosses, to the union cronies that advantage union work against small companies all across America. If anybody thinks for a second that the new 86,000 IRS employees are going to just go after the couple hundred billionaires or a couple thousand people worth a lot of money, they're crazy. They will come after citizens of every stripe who are just working people. This will pose huge cost on the American economy, and even the CBO doesn't think it's going to do a darn thing to lower inflation. I can't imagine that government spending would, for the first time in history, ever actually lower inflation.
Mike, I'm going to focus on the IRS aspect of this because my first job out of law school was the Office of Chief Counsel, Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. I was a trial lawyer. And things have changed a lot in the 40-something years I was there. But the problem is you've got an agency that is unbelievably incompetent. And I've said institutionally incapable of self-correcting. And at the very same time, they are given this tranche of money to increase their agents, and it's going to be audits on the middle class because that's what always happens here. So it's as if the American people are spending more of their money to get IRS agents that are not properly trained, and an agency that you still have to fax information to audit middle-class Americans. That's what this bill really does.
Well, Jack, that's absolutely true. A couple of things. One, the claim is that they hire these agents and they'll more than pay for themselves. I saw somewhere somebody figures it'll cost $250,000 for every additional IRS agent. That might be right. The chance of them generating more than $250,000 is zero. So this will be a net cost, not a net gain. But, Jay, you've been so much at the center working on these issues at the IRS. don't think that this won't even make it more politicized. You remember when they came after conservatives, everybody remembers the famous Lois Lerner. The risk that the IRS, now almost double in size, will continue to not only be incompetent but political increases dramatically. And it wouldn't shock you to know that I'll bet the Democrats know that too.
I am holding in my hand, actually, Mike, the consent order that we won in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. It's up on the screen now. Linchpins of Liberty versus the United States of America. And the two aspects of it that are really interesting. One is the IRS had to acknowledge the First Amendment generally prohibits the government from discriminating against citizens on the basis of viewpoints, especially when involved protected speech. But the other thing is the IRS admitted that its treatment of the plaintiffs, and these were these nonprofit conservative organizations, during the tax-exempt determination process, including their screening their applications based on their names and policy positions, subjecting those applications to heightened scrutiny and inordinate delays, and demanding from some of the plaintiffs information that the Tax Inspector General's Office, TIGTA, determined was unnecessary to the agency's determination of their tax-exempt status was wrong. For such treatment, the IRS expresses its sincere apology. That's in the consent decree, which I wanted it in there because I wanted to show the nature of this. But the problem is the whole policy here doesn't address the need that the American people are really feeling, and that is the increase of inflation at record rates higher than it has been since at least 1981.
It's impossible. Your point's exactly right. And the work that the ACLJ did to help conservative organizations protect themselves from the IRS should never be forgotten. Now you'll have twice as much work to do. But your point about this bill, there's not a single provision that you can point to in there that if you're a family living in Iowa or your family living out in Minnesota that says, boy, that's really going to help me make sure I can afford energy. Instead, it's going to give a bunch of money to somebody who wants to build a windmill or a solar panel instead of doing the things that would actually impact your life. This is the disconnect that the Biden administration is trying to foist on the American people as they celebrate this victory. It's going to drive costs to the average consumer, and I think people will be able to see right through this.
One thing I'm most nervous about is that it's the wealthy can afford their attorneys and accountants to handle interactions with the IRS. We know that this new group of IRS agents is being tasked with finding, as you said, find more money so we can pay for our Green New Deal. And I just have this concern. They're going to be going to the people who are doing their best to follow the IRS rules and pay their taxes on time and pay their right amount of taxes, but don't have a lot of professional assistants who are going to be hit with these audits, and it's going to be it's a lot different experience for them than it will be for the people in the top earning brackets who can rely on professionals to handle their taxes.
Undoubtedly, Jordan. 86,000 new agents. 86,000. That's a massive company in its own right. And this will fall. The small companies trying to comply, trying to figure out the complexity of the Internal Revenue Code, or a family who's got a second business that they do after work hours. Those are the folks that are going to suffer. Those are the folks who the IRS will end up coming after. And they won't have the time, the resources to actually defend against what they did that they thought was right. And they may even have it right, won't be able to produce some document that some government official says you must have. This is tragic. It will impose enormous costs, and it will benefit it'll benefit big government and big business at the cost of ordinary families and small businesses all across our country.
Let's go to, if we could, change topics for a moment and go to China. And that is, you have a piece up at aclj.org. The Biden administration displayed weakness during Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. This morning, reporters asked President Biden if he thought Pelosi's trip was a mistake, and he replied, that was her decision, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement of what she did. What's your sense of where we are with this?
I saw President Biden's comment this morning. No, that basically says we didn't want her to go. She went against our wishes. And the most important audience for that comment was Xi Jinping. He now knows that he has the capacity in this administration to push back and bully President Biden. And that's dangerous. We've seen the exercises they've been conducting, the Chinese have been conducting all around Taiwan. They've done it with minimal response from the United States. This is the kind of thing that creates the conditions for real risk, for war, right? Conflict follows weakness. Strength deters. And this administration, and even this morning's comment saying, well, that was her decision, suggests that he didn't think she should go. He thought that she should allow Xi Jinping to drive her travel agenda. That's bad for us.
We've got a new piece up from Secretary Pompeo. It's just up at aclj.org, titled "The Biden Administration Displayed Weakness During Speaker Pelosi's Visit to Taiwan." Though President Biden has made this prediction, Secretary Pompeo, so I encourage people to go read that at aclj.org, and we'll share it all over social media platforms. But he says he said they're concerned the way they were moving, but he doesn't think they'll do anything else. I mean, it was a pretty bold statement to make fairly casually from President Biden that he doesn't think they will take any more action.
I pray that he's right. It's not an independent determination. Part of what Xi Jinping will do will be the way he sees America respond. If it is through weakness, if it is timidity, if it's backing off even the simplest things, no one wants war. But we have allowed the Chinese Communist Party to walk all over us for decades, and it looks like that is the continued plan of this administration. And if that is the case, Jordan, if we continue to show weakness, then there's more risk, more trouble ahead from the Chinese Communist Party.
All right, as always, we appreciate our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who has overseen two agencies, one which is being compared to the IRS, will now be outdone by the IRS in size. Already was. The State Department was already 1,000 staff smaller than the IRS, which will now double. It currently has 78,000. They're adding an additional 87,000. It will be one of the largest government agencies, especially if you take out the armed forces themselves. We'll go through some of these staggering numbers when we come back. But just the size of this bureaucratic
and yet you
behemoth.
Can't even get your phone answered. Refunds ran months and last year they were running a year behind. This year they ran months and months behind. If you're dealing with agents, you're still being told to fax the numbers. Those fax machines are oftentimes what we're understanding going to agents' houses, which is not taxpayer security. So as I said, the problem here is you've got an agency that is basically incompetent, and now you're giving them more money to be more incompetent. So this is just throwing more money at this doesn't fix this problem. That's the reality. Throwing more dollars at this doesn't solve the problem. Challenging them is how you solve it, and that's why I put that consent decree back on the wall, back on the screen so our audience can see it. This was what we got against the Internal Revenue Service in district court, and in another companion case, we got the money to our clients. So you got to fight them, and that's what we do at the ACLJ, and we're in a matching challenge campaign. We encourage you for this August matching challenge campaigns, if you're able, support the work of the ACLJ. Jordan will let you know the details.
Yep, it's a great time to do it. We have back-to-back July and August, where you can double the impact of your donation to the ACLJ. So if you make a $25 donation, you've heard me say it before, that is equivalent of a $50 donation for us. All your charge is at $25, but triggers a match from a group of donors saying we'll match all those donations through the month of August. So it's a really important time for us at the ACLJ. If you can, support our work financially at aclj.org. We'll be right back on Sekulow.
I remember standing at my desk reading the letter from the IRS and reading the questions that they wanted me to answer. And as I read through those, at first I was kind of scared, because when you get a letter from the IRS, you think, oh no, I'm in trouble. But I knew we hadn't done anything, but I was kind of scared. And then as I read what they wanted, I became angry.
I thought it was one person against the entire infrastructure of the U.S. government. However, it was within 24 hours of me getting that letter that the same letter began to appear on the internet from other organizations similar to mine all over the country saying we're being targeted.
So we started getting calls, just in the beginning, just from a couple of organizations that had got an initial inquiry from the Internal Revenue Service. And initially you couldn't tell whether it was just a local situation like what we call a compliance audit, or whether it was part of a bigger program.
At that point, we were scared. We were intimidated. To have an organization with the power that the IRS has breathing down your neck and threatening things is incredibly intimidating.
And we realized there was a pattern of these follow-ups, asking very invasive information, and that was unconstitutional to be inquiring about to the American people. Speakers lists, the actual speeches themselves, contents of prayers at meetings, backdoor access to their website.
Everybody was being asked the same thing from all these different offices. They were trying to shut groups down that they disagreed with.
And I'll never forget what Jay said when he said, I know all of you are frightened by this, and I just want you to know we've got your back, and we're going to be taking care of this, and it's going to be okay. and I felt like the weight of the world was off of my shoulders.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We're going to start taking your calls now. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We'll start first with Bill out in Wyoming on line 2. Hey, Bill.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm asking a question. This business with hiring the extra agents in the IRS, does that include resurrecting this business of requiring banks to report deposits of $600 or more in accounts?
It's not in this. That was in Build Back Better. It's currently not in this legislation. Now, this has got to move to the House.
But that's a good sign.
Things could change. That would impact a lot of people again who make a lot of that's happening digital transactions now through places like Venmo and others, tipping going through that as well. But just to understand this, I think they feel like they don't really need it in there. Joint Committee on Taxation, that's bipartisan. It's Congress's official tax scorekeeper, says that 78, that's the baseline, to 90% of the new money raised from increasing the size of the IRS and more audits will be from underreported income from people making less than $200,000 a year.
So this is what's
that is right at the middle class, right at the small business owner.
And that's who this bill's targeting at. So the American people, especially middle class, are paying their tax dollars to double the size of the Internal Revenue Service so they can audit them to raise revenue. Now, I'm glad the $600 issue's not in there. We were right on top of that. We did a congressional hearing. It was during COVID. We did it from the studio next door. We briefed the issue. We briefed Congress on it. We were able to defeat it. But when you look at the fact that the IRS, Harry, is institutionally, in my view, incapable of self-correcting, and then you're just throwing more money at it as if that's going to solve this problem. And the target of this, as Jordan just said, is middle-class Americans.
Absolutely. And in many cases, that has always been the target. So it's important to keep in mind that over the last 20 years, we have seen the greatest transfer in wealth from the middle class to the rich in world history. And the Biden administration, quite consistent with its preference for the rich, has created a scheme involving adding 80,000 more IRS agents. They've created a scheme to essentially target the middle class. And so Jordan is quite right to point out that up to 90% of the new money generated will come from people making less than $200,000, while loopholes continue and while Democrats favor and vote in favor of additional loopholes.
Yeah, and those loopholes, by the way, the carried interest, you also have, so that where you have income coming in these hedge fund managers ends up coming in at tax at long-term capital gain rates. But you need to understand the size and scope of what's being proposed here. And Andy, you work with the IRS. I was an employee of the Department of the Treasury. My client was the IRS. You are the Department of Justice. You also represent the IRS. Things are a lot different now than when we were there. But this is making this pretty much the largest agency, other than the military, in the United States.
Well, if you combine the Pentagon, the State Department, the FBI, and the Border Patrol, those four agencies, then you've got the equivalent of what the IRS is going to become under this so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And again, I think it's a misnomer. I think it's given a name in order to make it sound like it's going to help the people. It's really not going to help the people whatsoever. What it's going to do is bestialize, make a behemoth and a monster out of what already is a monstrous organization, an intimidation organization, an organization that's going to go after not the people, as Harry said, who are really the tax cheats and the tax violators, but really under people who are making less than $200,000 a year, and only 4 to 9% of the money is going to come from those making $500,000 a year, and they're not the targets of what the IRS is about to do under this new law, Jay.
No.
I mean, listen to Senator Ted Cruz, Bite 31.
The Democrats are making the IRS bigger than the Pentagon, plus the Department of State, plus the FBI, plus the Border Patrol combined. All the Democrats say they're worried and want to lower gas prices. They all just voted to raise gas taxes and to raise your price at the pump.
And look, let's look at the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol, from a policy perspective right now, needs the assistance. They need more agents on the border. They get pittance. And that shows you the priorities of an administration. Spending shows priorities.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I want to go back to the phones at 1-800-684-3110. William in North Carolina on line 1. Hey, William.
Hey, guys. Thanks for all you do, and especially thanks for taking my call.
Absolutely.
I am the epitome of middle-income America. I mean, no big savings account. And here's my question. It's pretty simple. Now that this laughable Inflation Reduction Act is going through, if or when the Republicans take the House and Senate in November, is there anything they can do to waylay this travesty?
Very difficult, even if they took the House and the Senate, because they don't have the presidency. And when you don't have the presidency, the president can decide not to sign a bill. And I think that would be the risk I would think, Andy and Harry, you would run.
Yeah, I think that's true because the president sets the initiative. The president sets the goals of the administration. The president has the power of the veto. They would have to override him by 2/3 vote. That wouldn't happen. Once the IRS gets this power, it's well nigh untakeable in terms of reversing it and taking it back again.
Yeah. I think at best you could maybe slow down some of because these happen over 10 years.
Yeah.
That's where you'd probably get it is that you come in and you stop, you don't release the money somehow.
Yeah, slow it down.
Come through a mechanism.
But a reversal, Harry, is not likely. I mean, the president's not going to sign. This is what he wants.
President Biden loves two groups immensely: government bureaucrats and the rich. And both of these groups benefit enormously from this legislation. And so I think at the end of the day, he will be disinclined to go along with, let's say, a Republican Congress.
How do you think we're going into the midterms? They're getting pretty close now. We're in August. They're going to be here in 12 weeks. How do you think the inflation issue plays? Gas prices have come down a bit.
Yep.
So does it start fading as a political issue?
I don't think it's done because I think people are worried about the next crisis. So it's whether it's China, Ukraine is still going on. It's back to school for a lot of places. We're starting that process over these next few weeks. So COVID is still an issue that schools are dealing with, and how your school district might deal with it compared to, or state might even deal with it, and how different that might be from a neighboring state. So I think all of that combined, if we just don't know. Everybody has gotten used to getting bad information, bad news, whether it's the inflation, whether it's been disease, whether it's been, how do we get back to normal? We're not there yet. This is like the test of this back to school years. Is this get people back to normal? If not, I think that all this combined, no, people are not going to be excited about giving Democrats more power. The question will be, is Republicans coming together now that these primaries are coming to a close, and some are still going on in other states, but they'll all be done by early mid-September. You've got to have the party the Republicans have to come together. Conservative voters have to reunite, even if it was a tough primary, because that's the baseline. You've got to get your voters out. And there were a lot of tough Republican primaries around the country. You can't let that divide up your vote. Or if your preferred candidate didn't get one race, that shouldn't keep you at home when the stakes are this high. We'll continue to take your calls at 1-800-684-3110. Second half hour of the broadcast is coming up. That's 1-800-684-3110. As always, you can go to aclj.org, support our work. We do have a matching challenge now this month of August as well. You can double the impact of your donation. aclj.org.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast. Whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison because of their faith in other countries, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily, 5 days a week, 1-hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. We want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ, and when you do that, you're supporting our production teams, our videos, whether it's that kind of production and other things that we are working on. The ACLJ is front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to aclj.org.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are going to continue to take your phone calls at 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Next time, we're going to get back into some life issues. You might have heard the news out of Indiana. This positive news, a pro-life legislation passing through the state legislature there onto the governor's desk. It's signed. It will go into law mid-September. So we'll walk through that. Our team was involved in help drafting that through the process, as we are in many states across the country, working behind the scenes to make sure legislators are comfortable with the language they're using, that it gets enough support. And what they're trying to do in these states is make it as airtight as possible to legal challenges. They know there'll be legal challenges coming. I'm sure that there will be preemptive legal challenges to Indiana's law before it even goes into effect in September. So taking what the Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs case, applying that to real life situations, and these legislatures like Indiana who have gotten out ahead, or the early states, we're already preparing, but we're tightening up their legislation.
Yeah, and we were consulting with the legislature on this because we're concerned, obviously, since we're defending a lot of these. We defend Governor Noem in South Dakota. I feel very confident about that case, by the way. That's where we're defending an informed consent law they had, which was being challenged under Roe. Now with Dobbs, I feel like we will clear the day on this. So that's one set of cases. Then you have Jordan alluded to another broadcast. You have these trigger laws going into effect or new legislation. Kansas was a very convoluted process, very difficult process with that constitutional amendment and yes or no, and people didn't even know which way to vote. But Indiana has developed more of a straightforward approach to this, where they have the ban on abortion, except life of the mother, rape, incest, and they have a health exception in there, but it's only in the event of physical harm to the mother. So it's that kind of situation. Those should pass muster. But the question there is, of course, legislatively, can they get that through? And it sounds like they will.
Yeah. So we're going to take your calls on that as well, too. If you got questions about what's happening in Indiana or your state, remember, you go to aclj.org. We have that map of the country so you can track exactly what's going on at aclj.org or what to expect in your state. But we'll take calls in as well. That's at 1-800-684-3110. Through some of these IRS numbers, too. You heard this be talked about a lot. I just want to go through the actual numbers for you when you hear about the size of the IRS. So currently the IRS has 78,000 full-time employees. That makes it bigger already than the State Department, which has 77,000, bigger than the FBI that has 35,000, much bigger than Customs and Border Patrol, which is one of our huge crises in America, which has 19,000. The Pentagon itself, so the DOD at the Pentagon, and that huge building is under 30,000 employees. So you add up the IRS, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the FBI, and Customs and Border would still be smaller than the IRS, which is getting a more than double staff increase. So it's going from 78,000, adding another additional 87,000 to that list. I mean, it will be size like the U.S. military at that point. That's what you're unleashing on the American people, is a U.S. military-sized bureaucracy.
And they're not saying they're not going after the middle class. In fact, to the opposite.
No, they have to pay for this by going after
the middle class with more audits. Now, the IRS, as I've said, and I'm an alumni of the Internal Revenue Service, Department of the Treasury, Office of Chief Counsel, is institutionally incapable of self-correcting. I've said that for 10 years. I still believe that. We went to federal court and won. We could put it up on the stream. We got a declaratory judgment and a monetary damage for our clients when they went after the conservative groups. All that to say, the moment Joe Biden was sworn into office, there was a case that our friends at Liberty Counsel handled out of Texas. They're out of Texas. I don't remember where the client was, but they went after that client for a pro-life perspective and biblical issues. And we filed a FOIA request on that. We want to get all the information about what happened there. But there was already an injunction in place to prohibit that, yet the IRS did it again. That's why I say institutionally incapable of self-correcting. But we're on top of it, folks, here at the American Center for Law and Justice. We're not only talking about it here, we get to educate you on all these issues, but we actually do something about it at aclj.org and at ACLJ Action. Support the work of the ACLJ and our Matching Challenge Month at aclj.org. That means this. Any amount of money you donate to the ACLJ, we're getting a matching gift. And that is significant for our ongoing efforts to defend liberty and freedom and life and the First Amendment. Support our work at aclj.org. You donate $20, someone else is going to match that. aclj.org. Back with your calls, 800-684-3110 in a moment.
For decades, the ACLJ has battled tirelessly toward the goal of seeing the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. As steadfast defenders of the innocent unborn, we celebrated this historic victory at the Supreme Court. But now it's time to put the hammer down and dig even deeper, because our war at the state level has begun, and we want you to know that we're fully engaged. The ACLJ just launched a nationwide campaign to defeat abortion in all 50 states. In order for this to happen, you need to know exactly what's going on where you live, so part of our campaign includes a layout of abortion laws in each state at the time the Roe v. Wade decision came down. You can find this at our website, aclj.org. And as you'll see, some states were prepared for Roe to fall and had already passed certain laws to protect the unborn. But others remain hostile to life and are moving to enshrine a right to abortion into their state constitution or state law. And this is exactly what we're prepared to take on. The breakdown of laws that we provided is a first step. When there's a fast-moving development regarding abortion, the ACLJ will be the first to know about it and will be ready. Right now, we're calling on states to enact robust protections for life and to vigorously oppose efforts to weaken those protections. This will not be easy, but neither was our last fight. And look how that turned out. When the ACLJ fights for life, we're always on the right side of history. We're in a matching challenge right now. That means all donations to the ACLJ will be matched, making your gift doubled. So go to aclj.org right now and join the fight.
Back to Sekulow. We want to update you too, and we're going to continue to do this throughout the states as they move forward with legislation, this post-Roe era for life. So we saw the Kansas, which was, I think, is a wake-up call that you can kind of see coming through polling for the pro-life community in America about how to organize and how you've got to educate in the post-Roe world. And there's this rush. Yes, you want to be the first, you want to do this and that, but especially when it goes to voters. Now, legislatures are a bit different because oftentimes in these states, you've been electing somebody who's been running as pro-life for decades, but they haven't had a lot of work to do at the state level because of the Roe decision that hung over all the state legislatures across the country. So we saw in Indiana, the first state who's passed through new legislation and signed by the governor, goes into effect mid-September, to talk about, and ACLJ worked on this, to talk about kind of what does this look like in Indiana now that it's gone through both the House there, the Senate there, and signed by the governor into law.
So what we're doing is we've taken a 50-state look at this. And just Jordan mentioned, if you go to aclj.org, on the website, there's an interactive map. You just click on it, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on in the state you're looking at. We have it for our folks looking on TV or through our social media applications. Now, having said that, Indiana has made a move here to put in a pro-life legislation that will basically, I think it's hard to say which is a model because every state's different, but I think the approach they've taken, and we consulted on this, is the right approach. C.C. Hiles here is the senior counsel for the ACLJ, is involved in a lot of these issues. What did they do there? I think that's important for people to understand exactly what has been approved.
Right. So the legislation bans abortion, except it makes exceptions, except if the abortion is necessary to prevent any serious health risk of the pregnant woman or to save the pregnant woman's life, or the fetus is diagnosed with a lethal fetal anomaly, or the pregnancy is result of rape or incest. And then they specifically go, because we've seen problems where if you say a serious health risk, they'll go with mental health and say the mother's just not ready or doesn't feel like being a mother. They actually define serious health risk, and they say that that means that in reasonable medical judgment, a condition exists that has complicated the mother's medical condition and necessitates an abortion to prevent death or a serious risk of substantial and irreversible physical impairment of a major bodily function.
Okay, so, Jordan, I think that's model-type legislation. Yeah. So here's the question politically. There's a lot of reassessing going on right now after the situation in Kansas, because it went down with 30% of Republicans voting to keep abortion in the Constitution. What does this mean politically? Because there's a good legislation there.
Better chances to let right now is what we saw is that politicians who've been elected by the people, like these state legislators, are better situated currently, especially I'm talking about the speed, because they are educated. They do work on the nuts and bolts of legislation, so they understand exactly what Cece just walked through. If you put that on a ballot initiative, that's pretty confusing to explain. I mean, and again, I'm not talking about you to anybody. After you've gone through all the voting for this, voting for that, and you get to that, and you're like, okay, which way is this, right or wrong? So I think when it comes to ballot initiatives, we need to spend a lot more time. Roe is gone. Let's spend time educating people. I mean, that means doing a lot of what the left does, which is a lot more town halls, a lot more community engagement. We know in communities, minority communities where Republicans are starting to do a little bit better, that they need education on these issues. We have to be going into those communities and actually putting on events. You can't just say it's pro-life, it's not pro-life, yes, no. That's not enough for people. It's too big of an issue. And so while I think we're going to move forward in the legislatures that are pro-life, that have pro-life governors, and you'll see that moving forward, or even legislatures where they're able to override a Democrat governor's veto. I think that we've got a few states that have got these ballot initiatives in November. I think a lot of that will be based off the education. So I don't think that's necessarily that the Republicans won't win in those states, but can will enough voters be educated? They should be voting yes on this or no on that, and along with their votes for Republicans as they kind of come out in opposition to Biden. So you got to make that very clear too. And we'll start talking about more of those states as we get closer to November. But you are starting to see states where it's in the legislature. I think that's where it's kind of a better place because they've gotten the education, they've gotten the lobbying.
We're also going to see, though, I think we've got to be clear on this. We are going to see litigation, CC, in all of these states.
Right.
Conservative states, liberal states, the litigation is already hitting.
Litigation will be happening. We're prepared for it. We know that it will happen. I was in D.C. right after the Dobbs decision, and I literally was on a plane, getting on a plane. I was standing next to, of course, she didn't know who I was, but she was one of the head Planned Parenthood people in Maryland. And they were scrambling. They were like, we have to get our on-the-ground people. We have to get people educated. She was flying from D.C. to California for meetings. They were having conference calls. So they are prepared. They are organized, and they're ready to hit it. And we need to be the same on the pro-life side. And, of course, at the ACLJ, we are. We're watching all this legislation. We're ready for any kind of court battle that comes after it, any kind of attack that comes after this legislation. Like Jordan said, we're watching ballot initiatives. We're helping people understand what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, because that gets so confusing on ballot initiatives. We're just, paying attention of what is happening in every single one of the 50 states, and we're ready to act on behalf of life.
The question that I think is on everybody's mind right now is you've got some states that are taking kind of a wait-and-see attitude right now, or they're simply adopting what the court affirmed in Dobbs because you had their ban on 15-week and over abortions. And the fact of the matter is that was actually, as to that law, it was 6-3. It was overwhelmingly there. So how do you see that shaking out? Other states being more aggressive, some too aggressive, frankly.
Yeah, I think that, again, most people have trouble with ballot initiatives. And so if you'll notice in your state when there's a ballot initiative that's important to an interest group, you'll see a lot of money spent on trying to inform you about that ballot initiative. Then you might see 3 or 4 others that are on there where no one got behind it. There hasn't been much education. They're kind of leaving it up to voters. Maybe the last person you talked to, or you didn't talk to anybody about what this actually even does. I know where I recently voted, most of them were to increase the size of government, but that's not what they said. They said we want to split this agency into 2 separate areas. So that means they have to have double the staff. So I vote no on these things by saying that. But on some of these life issues. I think if we educate people, like a Rumble comment came in, so if the ballot's difficult to understand, it will cause voters to reflect that problem. Here's the issue, though. The way that most legislative text has to be written in ballot initiatives, it's never going to be simple.
Yeah, so
it
then
has to follow. You've got to go through the education. You've got to do the tough work to know how to vote. It will not be handed to you on a plate, just a simple vote, if you didn't educate yourself before you went into vote.
I think that's the message of what happened in Kansas, and that is you can't simply and obviously rely on, hey, people are pro-life here, they're going to vote, because as Jordan said and Cece's alluded to, the fact is these legislative referendums are so confusing that your gut reaction is vote no.
Right, exactly. And that's when it's like, if I'm for this, do I actually vote yes or do I vote no? It is completely confusing. And so a lot of people could have gone in and voted no, but they were really needed to vote yes. They're just, ballot initiatives are confusing. And like Jordan has said over and over, there has to be education. You have to have read it and know what you're doing before you go in. And a lot of times people don't. The first time they're seeing it is when they're in, the little voting booth and they're reading it, and then they're confused of, am I voting yes or am I voting no? If I'm for it or against it, it's confusing. So education has to happen if you're going to do these ballot initiatives.
Again, folks, we're going to keep you updated. If you go to aclj.org, all 50 states. So if you click on Kansas right now, it's updated based off the vote there that happened last week. We have all that updated moving forward. As Indiana, if it's signed into the law by the governor, we'll have that updated as well. You'll know. We'll talk more about the states with ballot initiatives as we get closer to November and after the primaries are all finished up. But I think again, education is going to be key. If you got it where it's going through your legislature and your governor, that's one thing. I think those will all move forward pretty easily on partisan lines. It's going to be when it's a ballot initiative and people being confused, especially if turnout's big. So if turnout is really big, you have a lot of voters who aren't as informed as they usually would be in a primary and a midterm. That a lot of people stay home for those. We've already saw in like Kansas, there were a lot more voters. They were hitting almost presidential year numbers.
Right.
So when you have that many more people voting,
you really have to educate.
A whole group means. They are going in there maybe because of one candidate or one person. They haven't been they didn't go through the newspaper or
but
the
that's
local
where
news.
ACLJ action comes in.
That's right. So our C4 will go in and educate people. In Kansas, we had 2 weeks. So
our ACLJ will litigate.
Yeah, that's right. But in the other states, we have time to build up. And I think it's going to be up to people. They're going to have to fund these efforts to educate. You're not going to have corporate spending to help you. In fact, they're going to be on the other side. All major corporations will be on the other side of this issue. So it's going to be up to grassroots Americans to take the decision and do something with it, especially at a national level. I think we're already starting to see that. We'll see more of it as people get educated on it. We'll come back. We'll take more of your phone calls, too, on the size of the government. I know we've got questions about that at 1-800-684-3110. If you have questions about your state, where it stands now on the life issue, we can answer those as well. And you can, too, by going to aclj.org/abortion. It's got the 50-state map. That's aclj.org. We'll also be talking Middle East when we come back and what's going on in Israel, violence over the weekend there. Israel responded. So again, we'll take your calls. We'll get into that as well. aclj.org. We'll be right back.
The Gaza Strip teeters on the edge of all-out war as an exchange of missiles between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group escalated on its second day. It's the worst fighting the Gaza Strip has seen in more than a year. Tonight, the Israeli military is claiming some deaths were due to a misfired rocket from Gaza.
Nearly 200 of the rockets fired by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad landed within Gaza, causing a number of injuries and deaths.
Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system proved highly effective, intercepting 97% of the rockets. There are no reported Israeli casualties. Gaza officials report 44 dead. Israel says the children were actually hit by misfired rockets from Gaza that fell on Palestinians as shown in video released by the IDF.
The White House weighing in on all of this, saying, urging for restraint, calling on both sides not to escalate things any further, but at the same time saying it supports Israel's right to defend itself against terror groups. And you also have both Hamas and that Islamic Jihad militant group vowing to retaliate, to continue retaliating. The last time the two sides were at war was in May of 2021.
The ceasefire declared late Sunday evening is currently holding, and a majority of people on both sides hope it stays that way.
Today, Israel said it was partially reopening crossings into Gaza for humanitarian needs and would fully open them if things remain calm.
The front lines of the conflict, known as Operation Breaking Dawn, are here on the Israeli-Gaza border. But behind the scenes, one of the main players is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Iran is kind of the backyard of all of these organizations. They are train them, educate them, sponsor them. So the jihad is one of the main radical Iranian proxies.
Their very mantle, if you read their charter, it says that they cannot allow the existence of the state of Israel. That's what they're trying to do.
All right, welcome back to Secular. We're going to dive back into the Middle East and Israel in just a minute, but I do want to take the caller, Barbara out of New Jersey, on line one, talking about the size of government, this Inflation Reduction Act. Hey, Barbara, welcome to Secular. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you. You guys are my favorite organization that I donate to each month. Your work is just unparalleled.
Thank you.
My question is, with this government spending, I don't understand how any politician or leader can justify spending this with our current supply chain issues. My grocery store, 40 years, privately owned, 3 in our area of wealthy Monmouth County in New Jersey, is closing on August 12th. We can't get meat. The aisles are empty, but we're going to spend this money. How is this justified? Are supply chain issues just going to be part of being an American today?
It can't be. And we were in a grocery store this weekend. I'm going to tell you something. I don't have, obviously, my kids are, Jordan and Logan have kids of their own. And baby formula, we just happened to walk by that aisle. Nothing there. I mean, Similac, whatever it was called, there was, Jordan, literally nothing there. I mean, it was like one item.
Yeah, this is not to address that. None of this is a big spending bill to pump money, not into your pocket like some of those other stimulus checks were. This is to pump money into the federal government's pocket to increase the size of bureaucracy. So the IRS will be doubling the size, not just by money, but by people.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going from under 80,000, just under 80,000 to an addition. They'll be able to hire 87,000 new people. That's not like replacements. It's not like one for one ineffective person, so a new person. That's just doubling the size. So I think it's going to be a huge issue.
All right, we've got Jeff Balaban here, who's their senior counsel for the ACLJ at our office in Israel. He's back in the United States for a few days. Jeff, Israel is in the news because rocket fire out of Gaza into Israel. What's the latest first? Then we're talking about what makes this one kind of unique.
Yeah, this is unique, Jay. This case, Hamas, which is the ruling force in Gaza and also a terrorist organization that also seeks the destruction of Israel. But in this case, Hamas basically stayed out of it. And this was an attack launched by something called the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another rejectionist Arabist Islamic organization that wants to destroy the state of Israel in its entirety, doesn't claim it wants a two-state solution, it just wants to wipe out Israel. And they launched these rockets, and in this case, Hamas stayed out of it, and maybe even tacitly wanted to have Palestinian Islamic Jihad wiped out. And in fact, the leadership was wiped out by Israeli responses because it's a rival. The Iron Dome, as you know, Jay, the missiles that protect Israel from missiles, the missiles that shoot missiles out of the sky, worked spectacularly well in this case, better than ever before, possibly because Islamic Jihad, although it launched many, many hundreds of rockets, couldn't launch them all at once. And the second major difference here is that in this case there was some Gazan civilians who were killed by rocket fire, but they couldn't claim it was Israel because Israel could show them the proof immediately that these were Arab rockets, Palestinian rockets fired out of Gaza that landed in Gaza and killed Gazans.
You know what's Jeff, because this is, we've been over there a lot. Of course, we have the office over there, and we've been over there together. But, people need to understand, Andy, that this is, you got to think 9-dimensionally here. So here you have a conflict between coming out of Gaza to Israel. But it's not Hamas, even though Hamas is the controlling party. I mean, folks, this is why we want to break this down for you. Rather, it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another group that's terrorist, but Hamas would like to see them eliminated because they affect Hamas's capabilities. So what do? They allow this conflict to take place, hoping Israel will actually knock out the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's leadership, which they did.
And did spectacularly, producing proof instantly with respect to Gazan civilians killed by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad missile. But what this proves, of course, is that the Middle East, and especially the Israeli situation, is, as you said, Jay, multifaceted. You've got Hamas, a terrorist organization. You have Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a terrorist organization. And you have the one true and only democracy in the Middle East, and that's Israel with its Iron Dome effectiveness, as Jeff said, higher than ever, being able to ward off these attacks, being able to succeed. Hopefully the United States will continue in its support of Israel. I do not wish the Biden administration to lessen that support. I want to see that support continued and extended.
Jeff, let me ask you this. We know that these, like I said, you got to think nine-dimensionally here. But what was the impetus for this particular action? What started the Palestinian Islamic Jihad taking this kind of move? And, of course, it's fascinating that Hamas stays out of it, hoping that the PIJ gets hurt in this, gets their leadership taken out, which they did. But what was the impetus for all this?
So I've seen a lot of speculation. One is, look, there's a moment of opportunity, according to the terrorists, right? They think they're testing the waters here. Remember, these are Iranian proxies. Iran is backing the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by the way. It's also affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, which Iran backs, as is Hamas. Again, 9 dimensions. Hey, you're right. So they're both Iranian proxies, but in this case, Hamas is governing. So these guys are a little more Wild West, and it could be that they're probing for Iran to see exactly what the reaction is going to be. Because remember, Joe Biden just came back from the Middle East, where he sent some very negative messages about who he's supporting in that conflict there. And so this could have been Iran testing the waters, and thank God Israel's reaction seems to have been just on the money. It wiped out the leadership, and Hamas stayed out of it, because right now pretty much the whole Arab world is a little bit sick of the Iran-based terrorism that's attacking Israel.
I think that is what unifies this kind of regionally past just Israel, and why Hamas wants out of it too is, I mean, all their leadership was killed. The entire Palestinian Islamic Jihad, from north to the south, the east to the west, is killed. But they launched 900 rockets. I mean, there's 900 rockets in a short period of time. Again, the Iron Dome working successfully, and because these are fired, as Jeff said, it kills a lot of Palestinians because they can be quite crude. But remember, the Arab world is very united right now against the Iranians, and anybody who's a symbol of the Iranians, whether it's the Houthi rebels in Yemen, whether it's the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is seen as a problem, not just as a threat to Jews in Israel, but as a threat to Arab regimes and governments, and whether it's kingdoms, whether it's, again, we saw post-Abraham Accords, these countries uniting, not just because they wanted good economic relations with Israel and the United States, but because they saw that they need to unite as a bloc against Iran, who they think is, out-of-control, radical Islamist regime who funds a lot of these terror efforts inside their countries, too. So the condemnation of Israel is a lot different this time around. I think that speaks to, again, the highly targeted nature of Israel's response, and also the fact that Hamas wasn't throwing 100 school kids in front of these targets like they would have done if they were in charge of this operation.
But the reality is exactly right. You have to realize the scope and nature of the complexities of the Middle East, which is, by the way, not new. This has been going on since the Middle East has played a significant role in world history, which has been a long time. And that nuance, we've lived it, we have worked it, we understand it.
We have. We've been there. We've seen it. We've done it in negotiations with the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. We've done it in negotiations with all manner of things in the Middle East.
Including the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
And the International Criminal Court, which Jay argued before in The Hague on the very matter of Israel.
All right, folks. Support the work of the ACLJ. That's aclj.org. aclj.org. Support the work of the ACLJ. And again, we have a matching challenge right now in the month of August, like July. You can double the impact of your donation. We have a group of donors that'll match each donation that comes through at aclj.org.
Also, subscribe to our social media feeds on Truth, on Twitter, on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Very important way to stay connected with us. We'll be back with more tomorrow.